welcome to this event at Cheadle Hulme. It's wonderful to see so many people and smiling people as well on this Wednesday evening. This is the Ask Andy Question Time event. There have been quite a few of these now. It's with the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Put your hands together for Andy Burnham. Very good. It's almost like we've done it before. My name's Chris Warburton and I'm a presenter at Radio 5 Live. I do the Weekend Breakfast programme and I live in Stockport as well. I live in Heaton Moor. And so a lot of what happens here is going to be of relevance to me. I'm going to find it very, very interesting. But of course, tonight is all about what you have to say and what you have to ask the Mayor. And we're also joined by people following us on Twitter. So if you're on social media, if you're following us on Facebook, then do please get as involved as you can tonight as well. Put your questions, make your comments, get involved. And in fact, tonight is all about getting as involved as you possibly can. The more questions we have from the floor and the more engagement we have, the better it will be. So if you could do that, that will be great. Lots of topics to get through. I know we're going to have questions on housing, transport, homelessness, police, the greatest hits for you, of course. But I want to start with this because obviously, you know, big politics here, big politics at Westminster this evening. Just to ask that question to you, we've got these indicative votes tonight. Could be a crucial evening, of course, as far as the Brexit process goes. And I just wonder, given that you've been so used to the rough and tumble of down there for so many years, where would you rather be? Would you rather be here with us tonight, be honest, or would you rather be down there?
Oh, that's the easiest question of the night, Chris. Definitely here. Definitely here. Because I look back at my old workplace down there and I kind of despair, to be honest. It always was dysfunctional, but now it's almost breaking apart at the seams like a nest of vipers, isn't it? And today, you know, people who haven't backed Theresa May's deal saying they'll back it if she goes, and it looks like they're just playing political games with the future of the country. It's just awful, isn't it?
But if you say it's the nest of vipers and you're giving up on them all, I mean, is that... It's both sides, isn't it? It's not just your old foes.
It's the whole place. I mean, there's lots of good people in there, on both sides, on all sides, actually. So, yeah, I've got a lot of regard for some of the people in there, but the place is increasingly dysfunctional, in my view. You know, this idea that it's all about point scoring rather than problem solving, that's basically the problem. So I know in my career, you know, where there was a genuine effort to sort of reach out, you can make some proper progress. Hillsborough was one thing I worked on. But then other issues, take social care as an example, which I tried to work on, you know, the parties are scoring points on it rather than solving it. And that's the problem, isn't it? We've got a dysfunctional social care system in this country because Parliament has never sorted it.
Political short-termism a lot.
Yeah, the place is kind of built to encourage that, as opposed to consensus and solving things. And I think, to be honest, social media made it even more complex in that, you know, everyone's now in these individual positions playing to their own followers on social media, and therefore Parliament can't come to collective agreements anymore. The big answer to Brexit is devolution, in my view. You know, the reason we got Brexit, I think, was because Westminster had failed to look after all parts of the country equally. So there were lots of places that felt very forgotten and right, I think rightly so. So the answer to it can't be more London-centric Westminster, can it? It's got to be more power passed out to the regions of the country, in my view.
Who's up for Brexit between now and 9 o'clock? No, I'm joking. Don't worry about it. We're not going to do that. We will go to Brexit towards the end, but we've got so many other things to talk about. Let's kick things off. Let's get to the floor. Let's get to some of your questions. And the first question, we're going to talk about the fire service, the future of the fire service in Greater Manchester. We've got some representatives here as well. But our question is from Umar Amin. Is Umar here? No. That's an interesting start, but I can put the question that Umar
please do.
Gave to us. The question was, and I know you'll probably correct the nature of the question, but you get the thrust of it. He asked, why are you getting rid of 100 fire staff?
It's not a case of getting rid, because no one wants to do that. It wouldn't be 100 staff anyway. We're trying our best. I've got Dave Keelan here tonight from Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. We're trying our best to ensure there's no compulsory redundancies. It's just that the organisation, in these challenging times that we're in, has to focus on the front line. That's what I believe it's my job to do for all of you as mayor. I've got to maximise the resource that I can get into frontline response. And if I'm honest, the organisation hasn't been doing that for a few years. So we are working within a very challenging financial sort of situation, but within that, we are prioritising frontline resources, and that has implications for some of the support staff who do really important jobs, but we're having to sort of review all of that. And I would like, Chris, for them to not be got rid of, in the words of the question, but to be given the opportunity to work elsewhere in the Greater Manchester system, maybe with Greater Manchester Police, or maybe to work as firefighters, because we're recruiting both police and firefighters at the moment. So there's plenty of opportunity, and we're going to look after the people affected. But yes, this does reflect a switch of focus on the front line, and as a result, we're taking resources out of the support.
You've been
service.
trying to work out how it's all going to happen. I mean, I saw the headlines last week. What was it? £268,000. The costs for consultants on this whole process. How aware of that were you, or do you just think, well, that's just how much it costs to go through this process?
No, I was aware, because this is a once-in-a-generation root and branch review of the service, which I felt was needed. And in fact, it was what Lord Kerslake recommended when he did his report into the response from the arena attack. So we had to take a proper look at the organisation and get quality advice, and that's what we've been doing.
But can you see, if you are someone who works in the service at whatever level, and you see a figure like that, and can you imagine that they instinctively think, well, that could be, I don't know, 5-10 of our wages over the next year?
No, I do understand that, but as a result of this review, I've done a lot of things that I believe have benefited frontline firefighters. So I inherited a situation where there was a shift system that could bring people back in on their days off and actually could mess around their lives quite a lot. So I've moved back to a frontline first approach, which gives people a more stable shift system. And that has actually cost some money to implement. I've moved to a situation where frontline firefighters can choose their annual leave rather than just be given the dates, which was what I inherited. And again, that's a change that's going to benefit people. I'm making commitments to invest in better kit, training. So there's plenty in this review that benefits somebody in the position that you described.
Now, I don't know if you know the specifics locally, but there was a follow-up question, which was how likely are the King Street and Whitehill stations to close? That'll be locally to here. Is that a done deal?
No, we would be going out to consultation on that proposal. So, Councillor Alex Ganottis here tonight, leader of Stockport Council. I would want to listen carefully to Alex and his colleagues about what the community feels about that. There will be a consultation. I think there's a really important point to make here. Myself and the Deputy Mayor, we visited every single fire station in Greater Manchester. Probably the first time anybody in our position had done for years, actually. And the truth of the matter is, just in the way that we maybe haven't done enough to support our frontline staff, the facilities in which they work, in some places, are not great. Some of these buildings are quite tired. They some cases didn't have basic facilities, basic toilet facilities for female firefighters. So we have said we need to get modern working conditions for people, and that could mean merging a small number of stations to give them a brand new modern environment in which to work. And in this case, in Stockport, we think it will actually improve the response times to the residents of the borough rather than worsen them.
Okay. Anything on the floor? Any questions on the fire service and the direction it's heading in? I'm looking at the front row here. But any points that want to be made before we move on?
Is that anything, Dave?
No, you're all happy?
Covered it.
Yeah. Okay, jolly good. We'll move on to talking about transport. Quite a few questions on this issue, and a question from Andy Hamlin. Is Andy here? There's Andy. Get a mic to Andy.
How far is Greater Manchester from having a unified approach to transport and ticketing, similar to Oyster cards? And by that I mean one ticket you can use on any bus, any tram, any train, any time.
Sounds like a slogan, though.
Yeah, I think you should be in the TFGM marketing
Copyright
department.
Andy Hanley.
I think, yeah. Well, it's what I want, and I want it as soon as we can possibly get it. But I probably wouldn't be being straight with you if I said, "Oh, we can do it next year." It will take longer than that, and the reason it will take longer is because I don't have the control, if you like, over those different modes of transport to be able to create a unified ticketing system. So obviously the trains would be the example there, where we could work with them to bring them in, but it's difficult because there's a different way of running the trains, and they're accountable to the Transport for the North and the government. Buses, well, they're deregulated, and we've got plans to look at reforming the way the buses work. But you are absolutely right that should be our end goal, and that is what I'm trying to do, because an Oyster card would reflect a much more integrated system generally, where people can hop between different modes of transport. This is what really, really gets on my nerves very badly. In London, it's £1.50 for a single bus journey. Here, it can be £4. In London, if you go on a range of modes of transport in your day, a bus here, a tube there, a train somewhere else, you're capped at about £8 or £9 in terms of what you can spend. Once you've got to that level, you won't spend any more. Here, there's no such system. So if you're going on all those different modes, you could spend £20, £25. So there's a real inequality here, not just in terms of the conditions and the quality of the trains and the infrastructure, but in the cost of public transport. It's much more expensive here.
What's the number one reason for that?
The fragmented, privatised system where you just cannot, and the lack of subsidy, I would say, to northern city regions like ours.
We're talking about the Oyster card being the kind of end point, but I lived in London for 15 years before I came up here 7 years ago, and I'm obviously not from around these parts, as you can tell from my accent. I'm down in London all the time, you'll be down in London all the time, so you'll be aware that the Oyster card has become pretty much a secondary system now. Now all you need is your bank card. So contact bank card, or you use your Apple Wallet or whatever it might be. That's the end point, right? So forget about looking for an Oyster card or whatever. They're already there. And it feels like we're always just one step slightly behind whatever London's at. When I say slightly, I mean quite a lot behind.
Well, hang on a minute. When it comes to cycling and walking, with our wonderful Mr. Boardman, I think we're going to leapfrog. We're behind London at the moment, but I think we're going to, with what he's doing with his B network, I think we're going to go beyond what they're doing. But yeah, the Oyster is a bit of a proxy for the kind of system we want. And yes, it should be contactless probably. To be fair to TFGM, they are working really hard on this. We're going to go contactless on Metrolink later this year. I think towards the second half of this year. We've already introduced a zonal system. So that is the building block, the foundation, if you like, for your integrated system, Andy, which I absolutely agree with. What we've got to do on that Metrolink map is then put the B network on top of the Metrolink, put a reformed bus system on top of that. And the other thing I just wanted to mention to you is I am going to make the case for GM Rail. We've got a review of rail franchising going on now following the absolute calamity of last year. And what I discovered through that was this system is totally unaccountable to the travelling public. I was kind of speaking out, challenging them, and they just didn't and wouldn't respond in any meaningful way. So I would like to have control over it, and not me personally, but us. I'd like us to control it. So I want to see if we can carve out the GM commuter services from the Northern franchise. And the reason why that's really important, particularly for this borough, is you can start then to think about integrating suburban rail with Metrolink, and then open up the whole concept of tram train, which TFGM very much want to bring to these parts where we are tonight.
Well, that might answer some of this question from Yvonne Guariento. Is Yvonne there? Yes.
Thank you. It definitely will. How soon will Cheadle get better public transport? Train station or Metrolink? Cheadle and Stockport also need a direct link to the airport, which is just up the road, but really hard to get to.
Good question, Yvonne. We'd like to... It's in the 2040 plan, but hopefully you don't have to wait as long as 2040.
Just finished Brexit by then.
I recognise that you are poorly served for public. You are one of the parts of Greater Manchester that is poorly served for public transport. And Alex has made this point many times as well. So the tram train thing, I think, is a real possibility here, and it could be within let's not overstate things, but let's say within a 5 to 10 year period. I would like to see if we could be opening new rail or tram options in this part of Greater Manchester.
What do you think about that?
It was a long time ahead for me. But it's also the airport link, which, Stockport station faces problems with HS2 coming already. But, we'd like a direct link to the airport. It's really hard to get to the airport by public transport from this side of town. And we get woken up by the airplanes, but we can't actually get them.
So that's a very kind of local link matter, but I know Cameron Fay has got a more regional link-up question. Here's the mic for Cameron.
With it looking less likely that the North can rely on central government to invest sufficiently in transport in the region, what will the Mayor do to ensure that Greater Manchester is linked not only with itself, but also with the other key cities of the North, such as Liverpool, Leeds and Sheffield?
Yeah, I think we've got to make the case to government, though, for that funding. We wouldn't be able to raise that ourselves. The amount of money that's needed to put that infrastructure in, it has to come from UK government. But I think we are beginning to make that case. Transport for the North has recently agreed a pan-northern investment strategy. So we've all signed up to it, all the councils of the North, all the political parties. Something interesting is happening, actually. The North is increasingly speaking with one voice, particularly on transport. And the argument I keep making is, London has had first call on public investment, hasn't it, for transport for decades. And it goes back to that point I was making at the beginning. Post-referendum, and in this situation where we have this very unfair London-centric country, surely the North now needs to come to the front of the queue for transport investment. If it was me, I'd have done HS2 the other way around. I'd have built it here first. But don't get into the trap of saying, oh, we don't want HS2, we want west to east. We want both, to be honest. We need both. And HS2 coming through, the airport and up into Piccadilly lays some of the enabling infrastructure for what's called Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is Liverpool through Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield. So we need all of it. We need a modern, quality public transport network that goes north, south, east, west, because that's the only way you can deal with the kind of saturation levels of congestion on the 56, M6, 62. We need that scale of investment over decades, and certainly I'm going to keep arguing for that.
It's all tied up in that phrase you used, the Northern Powerhouse, that catchline that we know. I just wonder what you all think of when you hear that phrase now, the Northern Powerhouse, and whether you've still got faith in it when you hear it, or whether it's... And I wonder, if any of you have got any comments on that, do feel free to get involved, but also, whether that phrase, which was obviously a conservative invention, it was a conservative idea, and there's people who have worked hard on it up here and regionally, but I wonder, is that one of the real victims, if you like, of all of the noise from Brexit?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to make a point before in relation to fire, which really illustrates to you what it's been like to be in our position for the last couple of years with Brexit just dominating everything and taking the attention away from everything. We're still owed £1 million due to the costs that Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue incurred on the Moorland fires last year.
Right.
In normal times, remember when the home counties flooded? It was how much do you want, wasn't it? And he was there in his wellies sort of handing out we didn't even get a minister visit when those fires were happening. 2 major fires happening simultaneously. Not one, no visit. And we asked for support, and we were told, it'll cost you an arm and a leg. And normally, when you've been through this kind of process, you get the money back for something like that, which was clearly more than a local event. But no, we're still waiting.
And this is all because civil servants, cabinet officers, whatever.
Ministers' attention is not on their jobs, and civil servants are running the show, and they're just saying, no, sorry.
Well, that could go on for years.
It's really serious. I think there's a real Brexit blight, which is another cost of Brexit that I'm not sure is fully, well, maybe people do get a sense of it increasingly now. You know, they've got homelessness we're maybe going to come on to, you know. Really terrible situation there. Where's Westminster on that? Nowhere, as far as I'm concerned. We've got councils, Alex will tell you, under massive pressure. You know, the fire service stuff we're doing, it's not because we want to, it's because we have to, because of the financial situation. You know, the fabric of public services is under massive strain, and yet they're down there without, you know, letting us to sort of pick up the pieces. And the police and knife crime, it does feel very much to me as though we're kind of hold things together on our own with the attention down there, just in a completely different place.
I know Bob Morris is here from Transport for Greater Manchester. I don't know if you want to pick up on any of the local discussions that were being had about some of the transport links out of Cheadle or from Stockport, Bob, at all. I don't want to put you on the spot, only if you want to. Only if you want to, Bob.
I think Andy's covered the majority, but it's fair to say that we are working with Network Rail where we can to really get the improvements. The station at Cheadle is difficult because back in the late 90s they took a track out. There's only one line there. It only allows one train per hour in each direction for the majority of the day. So even if we built a station, we couldn't serve it. So we're looking at ways where that track can be redoubled, what we can do with Metrolink going through. But it's not here and now in the next 2 to 3 years. It takes time with somebody like Network Rail.
And I know this. I know this is hashtag Ask Andy rather than hashtag Ask Bob, but we have had a question. I don't know whether you want to take this or whether you want to take it together. But this is from our viewers on social media, which is great, and it's great to have you with us this evening as well. And this correspondence, and I haven't got their name, I'm afraid, but it says, why aren't more unused rail lines in Greater Manchester being repurposed for Metrolink? Seems there's unused lines running westerly from Stockport through Edgeley, for example. They're giving a couple of other examples, but you get the general idea. Is that doable? I mean,
I think we have done actually, Bob, haven't we? We did up in Oldham, didn't we? That would be so. It's a good point. I think it's a very fair point.
It's a very good point. We've looked at every branch line, every main line to see where we can actually take them over with Metrolink. Oldham Rochdale line was the classic. It was a rundown service, and it was shut for 2 years. We rebuilt it, and within 12 months we were carrying 5 times the amount of passengers that it did under the old British Rail days. Now, those lines are now difficult to find because they're short sections, and how we actually connect with the Metrolink system is the hard bit, because Network Rail want to keep the junctions. They want to free those lines up for more faster trains, more passenger trains, but not for the sort of services we operate, high frequency. So we have to find a way around that. And that's why the tram train initiative actually allows us to do that. We can go so far on the former heavy rail line and then move on to a road type network. So we are looking, and particularly in the Marple and the Edgeley areas, but at the moment there's no feasible way of connecting to those systems.
I'll tell you what, Bob, you come here and I'll one thing to add. In my former constituency, Lee, there was a disused railway line, and TFGM came to me saying, "Oh, we want to put a guided bus on it," and I was like, "Oh no, we want Metrolink. We don't want that." But to be fair, you did do that, didn't you? Which was cheaper than Metrolink because obviously we didn't have the money to. But it's been a massively successful service, and they proved my doubts wrong. So options like that could be extended down here as well, isn't it? You know, people always are sceptical when they hear about it being a bus service, but it's actually been massively popular, cheaper than Metrolink or the train, and it's another option that we would like to extend if we could.
I think we're probably all right, but yeah, okay. But thank you. Thank you for your contribution. Is there anybody else who wants to make a point about transport, where we're heading in Greater Manchester, just before we move on? There's a gentleman at the back. Let's get if you want to just say your name as well, sir, that would be helpful.
My name is David Oliver. What about the South Reddish link and putting that back into service? Yeah. You can have a service from Leeds, Huddersfield, into Stockport, into Altrincham, into Norwich, right across to Chester. I'm just wondering whether the rail network are going to do this.
Is that the one that has the parliamentary, the single train? I strongly support that. You know, Andrew Gwynn MP for Denton has strongly, and Reddish has strongly lobbied me about that. I would love to do that. But that's exactly the kind of thing we could do if we had devolved control of the rail system. And that's, I hope people might get behind us in calling for that. When you were making the point before about using our voice, because government would have to agree to that. But if you could just imagine how that might work. Liverpool have got Mersey rail. Well, it's kind of the same, isn't it? We want GM rail. And then if we can run that system, integrate it with Metrolink, start to operate more services through the lines like the one you mentioned. And the other thing is, we get control of the train stations. And I think it's frankly quite disgraceful the way Network Rail neglect the train stations of Greater Manchester. Do you know, over half of them are not wheelchair accessible. How on earth can they justify that in 2019? They're dark, they're not easy to use, are they? If we got hold of them, actually, we're probably going to get onto the spatial framework at some point. We would build more houses around them. We would build them up. So there's so much that could be done if we could take control of our own rail system, both in terms of running better services, integrating them with Metrolink, but actually using the stations for more housing development and then reinvesting some of the proceeds to improve them. So it's a big argument we need to make, and the more I can get your support and everybody saying the same thing, that would be brilliant. But transport improvements are, I think it's our biggest challenge as Greater Manchester, to be honest, Chris. 2 years into the job, we've got a lot of economic growth in the city. There's a lot of people looking at us and wanting to invest here, but the transport system is not capable in its current form of managing that pressure.
How do you think you're getting on with it? You're almost halfway through. I'm going to ask you this on a few things, actually. You're almost halfway through your term. If you were going to give yourself marks out of 10, transport, come on, let's do it. What would you give yourself on transport up to now?
Oh, God. Anybody stuck in their car on Regent Road in the morning probably wouldn't be looking at a very high mark here, would they? See, I don't control the roads. That's another thing. People think I control things that I don't. And that's frustrating, because I get all of the complaints on my Twitter feed in the morning, but I don't actually control. The only bit that we really control is Metrolink and influence over the buses. But the rest of it, and you can't really. So what would I give us? I don't know, 5 or 6 out of 10. I've made some progress.
About right?
I think the Chris Boardman thing is massive progress, and I think that is beyond where anyone else is with regard to the thinking around that. We're on with.
Why is that? Why do you think, if that's the case, why do you think we're able to think in a way that other cities perhaps aren't in the country at the moment?
I think there's just a coherence here, that there's 10 councils that I think are quite enlightened and quite progressive in the way that they think. They want not just to help people get around, they want to improve people's health. When I had this opportunity to invest some money, I don't think they expected me necessarily to come with. I know TFGM didn't. They didn't expect me to prioritise cycling and walking because it's often the last thing on the agenda. But I decided to put it to the top because investment in cycling and walking provision delivers more returns than any other investment in transport, because it doesn't just help you cut congestion. It doesn't just clean up the air. It improves people's health at the same time. And the councils backed it. I think TFGM in the end said, no, OK, we'll go with this. And that, I think, is the strength of devolution in action, really, that we've kind of developed with somebody like Chris, a plan that everyone else in the country is saying, God, we wish we had that.
Yeah. We're going to get onto the clean air issue in just a second. We'll talk about some environmental matters. But, Rachel, we've got another question on transport from our guest here on the front row.
I'm changing the direction a bit. My name is Abba
Not
Gray.
too much.
No, not too much. On transfer. On
Yeah,
transfer.
all right, okay.
My name is Abba Graham. I actually attended one of your question times a while back in Rochdale, and I remember you mentioning young people and free travel. So it'd really be good to have an update on that, because it's been a while since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean, there is a big update there, which is we are going to introduce a free bus pass for all 16 to 18-year-olds in Greater Manchester in September. So that's going to happen. And again, it's been great support from our councils. We're trying our best to keep the cost down to people. So we're asking our colleges to contribute to it because they currently spend money on bus travel. So we're trying to kind of use the money that they're spending individually to bring it into a pot.
What's their reaction been to that?
Yeah, they're all right. They've signed up. The FE colleges have
got loads of money at the moment.
Yeah, but this is one of those things where it's a change, but it might be better for everyone, because if all kids have got that pass, maybe they'll get more bumps on seats in courses, and maybe we'll finally deal with the problem with kids who are not in education, employment or training. So we're on with it, and we just had an event last night where we're looking at some commercial sponsorship of it. We're going to build it out into something we call the Opportunity Pass. So it's not just free bus travel. What we're trying to get is offers from sports organisations, culture organisations, businesses to say, what does the pass also get at your establishment? Can they go into the Royal Exchange for free on a certain night of the week? Or could they go to, Man United have offered up women's matches and Man United women. You see what I mean? We're trying to say, the message we're trying to send out is, this whole place, Greater Manchester, is absolutely for you to get around and explore and take advantage of it. Because at the moment, too many young people here are a bit trapped in their own little world, in their own borough, because of the cost of public transport. So we think this is a big thing. But the reason why it benefits everybody is we've got to get more people using our buses. The bus system has been in decline here since the mid-1980s. And consequently, routes keep getting cut, fares keep going up. You've got to stop that if you are to turn the bus system around. Amongst 16 to 18-year-olds here, only 26% of them say that the bus is their primary mode of transport. It's cheaper for 3 or 4 of them to get an Uber than it is to pay for 4 single tickets on a bus. Now that is mad. That is mad. If you've got economics like that, you have got problems on your transport system, haven't you?
Yeah.
So we've got to break that and turn things around, and the Opportunity Pass is a big start of that. But September, it's coming in. I promise you.
Okay. We'll move on unless anyone else has got another point they want to make on transport. No? Okay. There we are. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd go to Manchester to collect a child from a theatre, and you booked me for going down a bus gate that I didn't even know existed. And I was told to go down that road in the morning.
Which road was it?
It was outside the palace.
Oh, okay, so Oxford Road down there.
You've changed it overnight, and 10,000 people have complained.
Now,
but you haven't told us it's a gate.
I've got a specific question on this. I thought it was going to be a bit detailed, but seeing as it does say, how can...
I was going to say it'll go to paying for the bus pass, but that's probably the wrong answer, isn't it?
It says, how can Manchester Council justify the amount of money they're raking in from drivers due to inadequate signage, especially on Oxford Road? It has been proven, hang on, that the brain does not have enough time to process the info in time. I don't know if there's been specific brain research into Oxford Road. It says, since enforcement began, figures contained in the ruling show 321,802 penalty charge notices were issued involving the 3 stretches between October 2017 and September last year. And this is a great little ending. A total said to exceed initial expectations, which does feel about right. And look, anyone who's driven up there I've done it. You think, I'll go to the Whitworth. I'll just put. Oh, hold up. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you're done. Yeah. What's going on up there?
Well, I wasn't joking before, because it's a serious matter. And actually, this is one of those things where I can say, let's ask Bob, because it isn't.
Can we ask Bob about Brexit?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Anything difficult, Bob, it's coming your way. But just to explain, it's not our scheme. It's not my scheme. It's not TFGM. It's Manchester City Council. So I hear what you're saying, and those figures are quite worrying. But it's not. I'm being unfair to Bob, because it's not a TFGM scheme either, is it?
The scheme was originally ours,
right.
And the reason being is that stretch of road was the most congested, polluted in Greater Manchester. 150 buses an hour going through, plus all the general traffic. It was horrible. You were getting visitors to the universities getting choked on a daily basis. So we did the scheme that also involved bus rapid transit from Lee. We won't go into that one, Andy, but it worked. It was a difficult time because people didn't want to not drive down Oxford Road. And we had to enforce it. And at the end of the day, that gets handed over to Manchester City Council. All the scheme was done in compliance with Department for the Transport Regulations. If there is an issue where there's repeated breaches, then it goes to an adjudicator, and the adjudicator can actually look at some of that and say, well, actually, even though you are meeting the guidelines, we recommend we do that. And that's what Manchester City Council are doing. They're doing due process. But the fact is, the scheme was designed to stop cars going up that road to make it cleaner environment and allow cycling to them. The cycling is fantastic up there now. So, yes, if people have been caught out wrongly, then we need to look at that and to see what's going on. And I can assure you, Manchester City Council are doing that in a regular forum.
Did that total exceed initial expectations, Bob?
We didn't actually have initial expectations. What we said, this is the amount of traffic we will displace from this road. So it wasn't about the fees, because the ideal thing is we catch nobody going through a camera.
But it's good to make the money as well, though, right?
It goes, in fairness to Manchester City Council, all the money goes back into further road improvements. Okay. So we have to think about, it's there, it's been churned in again.
Okay. So we're talking about it's better to get on your bike or it's better to walk where possible, and we've heard about the Mayor's plans around that. We've heard about people choking on Oxford Road, and we've all had experiences of that over the years as well. Let's talk about some of those environmental issues, which are all kind of linked to what we've just been talking about as well. And we've got a question. Well, now, the question is from Annette Hargreaves, but she's got a spokesperson for tonight, and I'm told that's Neil. Where is Neil? Go on. Is Annette going to do it? Well, you're going to be brave, Annette? Come on. Let's support for Annette. There we go. It's all friendly, Annette. Don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, Annette.
I'm from High Lane, and I'd like to know, how will the air quality zone be policed out of our borders with East Cheshire?
Bob looks like he wants this one again.
Come on. You're getting off so lightly.
I better say, I'll say something, and then Bob will pick. Bob, go on, Bob. Then I will say.
In simple terms, all the key routes and all the main roads that come in and out of the clean air zone will actually have some form of vehicle detection, more likely than not automatic number plate recognition systems, cameras that go up, similar to what happens on the motorway. So that's how it'll actually be policed in that terms. I'm sure Andy will have the wider piece.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if everyone knows this, but we are proposing to go for a greater Manchester-wide clean air zone. So we're not just focusing on the city centre. We are saying all 10 boroughs, the whole lot. And we've got a bid into government to pay for the enforcement infrastructure that we will need. From your number plate, they know whether your vehicle is compliant or not with emissions. So, that is immediate. And, I don't know if you've followed this, but what we've said is that HGVs will be in the scheme, vans will be in, taxis and buses. Vans won't be in immediately, but they'll come in 2023. But we're saying that private cars won't be included. One of the reasons being that 80% will be compliant anyway. So the large number of cars are not actually necessarily the problem. And of course, as we've been saying tonight, the state of public transport in Greater Manchester means in some places people have to rely on their car. They've no choice because they haven't got alternatives, and that's why I think the congestion charge was ruled out so heavily. So this isn't a congestion charge. It's really important to say. This is a penalty charge if your vehicle is not compliant. And what we'll be setting up will be an incentive scheme, a clean lorry fund, a clean van fund, a clean taxi fund, clean bus fund, so that we can give financial support for people to change their vehicle from a polluting vehicle to a clean vehicle. And actually, if you think about it, the city centre, but actually everywhere, will be a much better place to live. So we feel we just got to get on, grasp the nettle, do it, and hopefully also install a lot more electric vehicle charging points around all 10 of the boroughs as well. So yeah, it's a big change. It's coming. We're required to do it. It's not an optional thing, but we think we've got the balance right, I hope, in terms of making sure that it's not the ordinary person who's sort of hurt by it.
I know some friends of mine who will talk about children who are being taken to schools in London who are wearing face masks. Yeah. They're wearing face masks on a daily basis because the fumes and the air quality has got so poor in London. But are you aware of where we stand? There's a National League table for emergency admissions to hospital for asthma. which is obviously linked to air quality, particularly for children. Are you aware of where we stand in that league table?
We're right at the top.
We are.
We're right at
Highest
the top.
rates in the country.
Yeah, right at the top. I remember in my mayoral election campaign going to a school on the Prince's Parkway, and I was raising this concern around air quality. And I think because it's invisible, we've all been a bit complacent about it. You know, cigarette smoke, you can see it, can't you? And therefore everyone gets more upset about it. But this is probably as harmful, but we can't see it. And therefore I think we've, as I say, not done enough on the whole thing. But I remember going there and we had a reader, a very sort of sensitive reader with us, and the legal limit was something like 42 on the thing, and it was like 70 or 80 on the reading. And there was a kid there saying, on hot days, I've got asthma, so I can't play out in the playground, you know, because I just can't breathe. If, you know. And it's just not right, is it? I mean, it's sadly the poorest kids in the poorest communities breathing in the most polluted air, because they're the ones who live by some of the biggest road junctions and
a public
motorways.
health emergency?
I'd say so, yeah. We've got to get on and we've got to do something about it. And this is why the cycling and walking thing is so important. If Chris Baldwin were here tonight, he would say to you the thing that most worries him about Greater Manchester is we do 250 million journeys by car every year that are less than 1 kilometre.
Yeah, that's mad.
250 million, just let that sink in a little bit. 250 million journeys that are less than 1 kilometre by car.
Well, it always makes me, I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the 7-year-old is always the very first to point out if it's an unnecessary journey. So they're better
They're
than
on
we
it.
are,
I think they are on it. But I think, you know, there's issues we've got to address here around pavement parking, you know, because we don't have the same powers as London have got to sort of. Sorry, this might mean more tickets. I'm avoiding that gentleman down there, but we've got to do that though, because some people can't get out of the house if they can't get their wheelchair or their buggy down the pavements. So I think we need to really grip this and say no. We should be promoting active travel, cycling and walking wherever we can, and that cleans up the air better than people. Because even if you're driving a compliant car, it's still putting some emissions out there. It's going to be much better for everybody to cut the number of car journeys.
You're talking about those legal levels of air quality that you experience when you're out and about with those school kids. If that's so important, if it's so urgent, why is Greater Manchester not planning to achieve legally compliant air quality levels before 2024? That's in the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan, which again feels a long way off, and we're talking about something so important that you've just said.
It does, Chris. I accept that, but it's a massive change that we're talking about here. You know, it's a huge change. If you think of the HGVs that are sort of you know, rolling around Greater Manchester, what they're pumping out, you know, massive change needed there. Also in terms of vans, and as ever, the government aren't necessarily coming over the hill with all of the support to help us to do it. You know, if they were to have a national car scrappage scheme, we would include cars, but they're not. So you know, we've got to go at the pace that we can realistically go, given the resources that we've got. But I agree, and no, I think it is. I think it is an emergency, and the air will start. Will start to improve very quickly once we bring in the scheme in 2021. So we might not be compliant, but we'll be moving towards it, and it will be getting cleaner all the time.
When you see the sort of bigger challenges around climate change, water supply, been all sorts of warnings about that from the Environment Agency in the past couple of weeks. Where we're heading with so many things that are going to demand so much more pressure on people who will be in your position in not too many years to come. Again, how much is that being overshadowed by all of the resource and concentration that is going into Brexit?
Massively. You know, we had a Green Summit on Monday, and it was brilliant, actually. It was fantastic, and we brought some of the young people who've been out there making their voice heard, and I paid tribute to them on your behalf on the main stage. I brought them onto the main stage and I paid tribute to them on your behalf. So I said, thanks so much for getting Brexit off the news for a couple of days. You did a massive public service to us all. But let's be honest, that's more important than Brexit, isn't it? It's more important. And yet, I don't see the urgency within UK government. But this is another area where I hope you're beginning to feel that devolution is making a difference for you. So we, on Monday, and Alex actually deserves great credit. Alex has led on what we call Green City Region for us, has done a fantastic job, has persuaded the 10 councils and the public bodies and the Chamber of Commerce and others to accept that Greater Manchester is going to go for 2038 for carbon neutrality. That's over a decade ahead of the rest of the UK. And we believe this isn't just the right thing to do by the environment and the planet, it's going to probably benefit us economically, because this is the future, and the areas that are embracing that first will get job benefits from doing that. If we're going to have to retrofit some of our old properties to make them zero carbon, that's going to create jobs for young people across Greater Manchester. So it's the right thing to do, and this is basically about being what we were in the past. We were an industrial leader in the past, and I think by going first on things like digitalisation and decarbonisation, we're making Greater Manchester an industrial leader in this century. And this is how I think, Chris, devolution can change the policy debate in this country. Because the government in Westminster is always legislating for the lowest common denominator. When you're freed up through devolution, we can set a much better, quicker pace that's better for people. And I hope people can see that that's something that's now opening up through devolution.
You talked about those children at that summit. I saw some of those photos on social media and they were great. Those kids who have taken the day off from school to go on these marches, does the Mayor of Greater Manchester support them taking the day off?
Yeah, do you know, I think I do actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And you will if they choose to do more?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I wasn't wild when they stopped Metrolink for a couple of hours, but... and I don't think it was a particularly safe thing for them to do, so I'm not condoning that.
But if they do it again, you'll be behind them, will you?
But you wanted to see the reaction they got in the hall. And it is part of education, isn't it, to learn how to use your voice and to speak up on issues that you care about. I'm not so sure about it being repeated every month and all of that.
Yeah.
I think, keep it more within reason and maybe do it more within the lunch hour or something. I don't know. Find a better way of doing it. Maybe, I don't know. But no, they were brilliant. The whole of the Green Summit was basically lit up, wasn't it, Alex, on Monday by these young people, as well as Bez from Happy Mondays who came. And
he'll light anything up. Okay, great. So any more on the environment or air quality or the issues around that before we move on to the next subject? Again, if you're... Oh, here we go. Yeah, this gentleman.
I wonder with... obviously, you said you were at the Green Summit on Monday. I wonder how the airport factors into this whole strategy around the environment, or whether that's been sort of conveniently disregarded.
No, not conveniently disregarded. But I think it's a fair point for me to say that aviation policy is not really that is one of those things that won't be devolved, to be honest, because it's by definition more of a national consideration, and so the government nationally has a kind of a consideration for what it's doing vis-a-vis aviation with regard to carbon neutrality. What I would say on aviation is, we've got an airport here that's got 2 runways, and there's a proposal to put HS2 through it. I am really clear that they should not build a 3rd runway at Heathrow. If they're putting in this infrastructure here, they should move to a situation where we use a much more balanced approach to managing air traffic, with more coming through here. Because if we're going to have an airport that's got high-speed rail going east, west, north, south through it, which is the proposal, our airport will be opened up to a lot more people in this country, and we won't then have to build massive environmental damage through a third runway down at Heathrow. So it is part of the consideration. It's not like we don't consider it, but of course, it goes beyond. It's the realms of national, international, rather than regional. And the airport, let's be honest, is a big part of our economic growth here in Greater Manchester.
Yeah.
What's your name, sir?
It's Daniel. Just ask you a question about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Manchester Airport, are there not a number of councils within Greater Manchester that are actually shareholders within that organisation? So you say that it's a national thing. It isn't. You've got Rochdale Council, Ashton, and them too. So, and you've got councillors that sit on the boards of that airport as well. So,
what I was saying was, though, it's a national policy in terms of what you do about aviation emissions. Yes, we have an airport and we can influence what happens on the ground at our airport, definitely, via the councils, who are, I think, just over 50% owners now, aren't they? So we could do, but we can't change aviation policy, is all I'm saying, from here, because it's obviously governed by international.
So what kind of
agreements.
control, just in respect of what the gentleman was saying, what kind of decisions can those councils make vis-a-vis the airport then?
Well, they have.
If it's not aviation policy.
There are policies around what we've just been talking about around, some of this hasn't been popular, but the number of cars coming in and out of the airport, the waste that's coming out of the airport. So it's nuts and bolts, really. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if this is what you're saying, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in theory, we could close the airport. If they could, or they could disinvest and sort of try and scale it down. But
There's your headline.
Well, in theory, but there's no way I would recommend that they should do that, because people are going to carry on flying, and we have got a successful international airport that's undergoing a 1 billion transformation at the moment. And if we did something to Manchester Airport, it's not going to suddenly cut the number of people taking flights. They would just be taking them from somewhere else. So I think yes, we should play our part in the national aviation debate. But I'll be honest with you, there's no point. I'm proud of the airport. I think it's a massive asset to Greater Manchester. I think the council's cleverly invested in it many years ago and have returned a lot back to the boroughs through that investment. And I wouldn't, be recommending that at this stage we unilaterally did something to our airport that then others didn't follow and then damaged us economically. But
I wasn't saying that you do something. I'm saying that you do have some control.
We do. We do. You're correct. You're absolutely correct about that. And yes, we need to, as part of our 2038 commitment, Manchester Airport needs to be a big player in that. Its own buildings need to be zero carbon. I think I'm right in saying that the new terminal is zero carbon, which is a pretty good statement. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really taking shape now. The first bit of it is going to open early next month. So, they are conscious of these issues. They really are. And obviously the 10 councils are always a voice on that board to make sure, if they were purely private, I think there'd be less influence. So your point's a good one, but we do use our voice on that airport board to influence those kind of things.
Okay. Oh, a woman right at the back there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kath Moss. Andy, I was interested in your comment climate change being more important than Brexit, which I would completely agree with. However, a lot of us think and feel that the two are directly linked or very closely linked, both in terms of the deregulatory agenda that's associated with many of those that are pushing for Brexit, but also the money that is behind Brexit, or that was behind the Brexit, a large element of the Leave campaign, which has commonality with climate change denial and so forth. So I think for many of us, actually, Brexit, there is a direct link between the two that we shouldn't lose sight on, as we look to combat climate change.
I think that's a fair point, Kath. I wouldn't support any weakening of our environmental standards if a deal is done and we are to leave. I wouldn't support any weakening of our workers' protections, employment standards. And I think those are the kind of things that we should test whatever comes out of Westminster in the next few hours or days.
Okay, thank you. Great points from the floor, so thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
for
really
that.
good points.
The more involvement, the better in the final half hour that we've got, and thank you for the contributions we're getting from people who are following this on social media as well, those people on Facebook and Twitter. Keep getting your points in, because we've got a point from a couple of people who are following us on Facebook, which is great. But let's move on to talk about homelessness. Obviously a massive issue, something that, again, you've set your stall out on, really, as to how you're going to deal with that in the city. And Charmaine Sangster, is Charmaine? Hello, Charmaine. You okay? Looking very bright. Lovely top.
Thank you. Thank you.
What's your question?
My question is, how are you handling the homeless situation in Greater Manchester? As far as I can see, it's spiraling out of control.
It is my top personal priority, and I devote more of my time to it, possibly transport, but I would say as one specific issue, probably homelessness more than anything. For the first time in 8 years, on the official figures that came out earlier this year, Greater Manchester has reduced the number of people sleeping rough. So I am quite proud of that fact, because we have seen an exponential increase since 2010. It's increased by something like 800 and something %. But for the first time this year, we've recorded the first decrease. So it's been going up like that, and it's for the first time the tide has sort of turned and come back down the other way. It's nowhere near enough yet, But it shows that some of what we're doing is beginning to work, and particularly when Birmingham carried on having a big increase, and so did London, I think we can say, well, some of our policies are working. So the big intervention, again supported by our 10 councils, is a bed every night. So ever since November, we have been operating a system in all 10 of our boroughs whereby we have provision open every night of the week, and people are able to access that provision and not be left with no option but to sleep rough on the streets. So at the last count that we did, 370 people are still in a bed every night provision every night in Greater Manchester. And I've visited loads of those shelters, and many people have said to me, well, one person said to me in Audenshaw last week, I'd be dead if it wasn't for bed every night, because it's been in throughout the winter. Some people have been in those places and moved on to a fixed address. About 400 people have done that. So I think we're onto something here with the bed every night, and I am trying to see if I could make it permanent. No other city in the country now has got stuff open at this time of year. They just do it through the winter, then they shut it. We're the only ones doing it. I've extended it to the end of April, and I'm hoping we'll be able to extend it beyond that too.
Because I saw the former homelessness czar, Louise Casey, who's a real expert in all this area, isn't she? And she was talking in the city last couple of weeks, and she said that Greater Manchester was shining a light in the darkness of all of this, and basically saying that this strategy is working. However, if you get to the end of April, and if you look around and you haven't got the money, what then?
Yeah, and that worries me, if I'm honest, because I'm trying to do something quite challenging here for everybody. But the way I look at it, and this is the argument I'm making to the health service and the police to a degree, it's not as if there's not a cost if we leave people sleeping rough, because they will end up in A&E, they will end up in mental health crisis or in police custody. So the public sector pays, but in a bad way, because it's too late then, isn't it? So the argument I'm making, Chris, and this is again something only I can do through devolution, because we've got the health service devolved here, I am trying to persuade them to say, look, pay the 32 quid a night for people, because actually that might be cheaper than one visit to A&E in 3 weeks' time. And we're making progress. And obviously it's challenging because everyone's under pressure with their budgets. But this is quite innovative. I don't want you to think that we're saying, oh, we're wonderful. We've nowhere near solved it. And actually, you say it's spiralling out of control. I think there is a difference between what people see in the daytime in the city centre and the real picture with rough sleeping at night. Because there are some people out there who have homes, let's just call it as it is, who go out and perhaps play on the sentiment that there is around rough sleeping and homelessness. And I can see Wazin nodding, because JMP do know there are people who do that. But we need to deal with them in a different way, but then be really supportive to those who've got nowhere to go. And I do want to make a bed every night permanent. I do, and I want to see a real decrease this year. I made a commitment that I would try and end rough sleeping by 2020, and I'm not going to kind of sort of with weasel words. I don't know if I'll make it. Maybe it's odds on that I won't, but I think I was right to make a big statement about this is not right in this day and age. And it's brilliant, honestly brilliant way the Greater Manchester public bodies, but more than that, Chris, the public have responded. The generosity that I get. And you've got Vincent Company stepping forward, pledging his testimonial to it.
Brilliant.
We've built a bit of a movement here, and I'm pleased that Louise said what she said, but we've got a lot further to go.
Vincent Company's a heck of a guy.
Top man, yeah.
Whether you're United or City. Go on, Shimei.
Oh, no, we're all City. We're on the league. We've got to beat Liverpool.
No, I'm not. What I want to ask you, I remember before you were sworn in, I remember that was one of your main agenda for homelessness. You were so passionate about it. Are you still passionate about it? Yeah, and that shelter, there's a shelter. Is it still open? One regarding electricity problem.
God. I mean, this was really frustrating for me.
Yeah.
I mean, really frustrating. We've got, at the last count, I can't remember how many shelters we've got with bed every night. Yeah. And a newspaper sort of picked on one that had a problem with electricity to try and say that the whole thing was rubbish. And everyone said to me, I see your whole scheme sort of completely failed. And it was because we had one shelter where there was a problem with electricity. And by definition, we're going to old, unused buildings. And they have problems, don't they? Because they're unused for a reason, because they're not the best. And so with that one, we couldn't fix the electricity. And we couldn't use it. But it was it just strikes me that why do people want to see the negative? We had people in provision all through Christmas. They're still in there now. If you go and speak to them, as we did last week, people say this has totally changed our lives. We wouldn't be here without it. And it just depresses me at times that people want to find the small negative when actually there's a much bigger positive. And anyway, but that's life at the moment, isn't it?
Which newspaper?
Well, it was the Manchester Evening News, and
What was it?
They focused on one shelter and I think anyway, they tried to portray it as though the whole scheme was flawed and failing because of this one shelter. Obviously, that's the inference that you picked up from that that story, and lots of people picked up that inference. But you know, Stockport, how many have you got, Alex? You've got a number of places open, and they're working fine, but there's no media coverage of that. Yes.
Broadening out from rough sleeping, looking at the hidden homeless, people who are in unsuitable housing, people who are sofa surfing, people who can't find a place for their families in B&Bs. Do you want to say anything about the Mayoral Development Corporation and the opportunities that Stockport has for social housing and the idea of, you know, trying to get people into suitable homes?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if Alex might want to chip in on this, but I'm quite excited by what Stockport are doing. I think they're setting a new lead when it comes to ambition for town centres. And I think the plans that are taking shape, we just confirmed the Stockport interchange plan in the last few days. That's exciting. Chris Boardman's team have come up with a new scheme as well. It obviously links to the residential development that we're looking to bring in, and I hope that a number of those homes that would be built inside the Mayoral Development Corporation zone would be truly affordable, and indeed some for social rent. So I'll leave Alex to come back on that, but on your bigger points about sofa surfing, I want to do a lot now to focus on the private rented sector. But I think they're a big part of our problem. Not every landlord, but there are some landlords who are a real part of our problem. They don't maintain their properties properly, and the minute someone can't pay the rent because they've got problems with 0 hours contracts or whatever, they're out. You know, the biggest cause of homelessness in Greater Manchester is what they call no-fault evictions, fast-track evictions where they just get people out because we can't have this. So we're looking at developing a GM Good Landlord charter standard, and we're going to get much tougher with the unscrupulous private landlords because they don't maintain their properties. That puts the safety of those residents at risk, but it also drags whole communities and whole streets down, and we think it's time to get much tougher with them.
We've got a question from Rachel Dennehy on Facebook. Hello, Rachel. If you're still with us, hopefully you are. She says, I wonder if Andy has watched the 60 Days on the Street documentary that was on Channel 4. Now, I don't know if any of you guys saw this, but it was a heck of a show. And I'd had a few beers and I came back into the house, stumbled across it, turned on the telly, and it was kind of shocking viewing, of course. And it was the survivalist Ed Stafford, who was living like a homeless person in Manchester for 60 days, of course. What did you think of that programme and what did you take from it? Because it was such a visceral, graphic impression of what it was like to be on the streets.
Yeah, I didn't, if I'm honest, watch the whole thing. I just saw some extracts from it. But yeah, it's a tough thing to watch, and it does bring it out in a very vivid way. We had some concerns about it because he began the programme, I think, on the voiceover. The mayor has ordered a crackdown on rough sleepers. Well, I'm sorry, the mayor hasn't ordered a crackdown on rough sleepers. He's ordered a crackdown on rough sleeping and is doing stuff to ensure that people can have a roof over their head. So it was kind of, they portrayed it as though we were, and the Greater Manchester Police were just unnecessarily harassing people, or that's what we were trying to do, that we were cleansing the streets. That's not at all what we're doing. And they didn't even come to us for comment, and a programme like that should have come to us for comment, and they didn't. And so I think there was a bit of an agenda there, it seemed to me, to sort of say that we were all being really, really harsh. But I think to then be fair to them, I think it did bring out some of the challenges that GMP face on a daily basis, trying to differentiate between those in genuine need and those who are either preying upon people in a vulnerable position, and there are those people, aren't there, selling spice or whatever it might be, or modern slavery is an issue, which where some people are out there begging, and maybe there's other unsavoury people manipulating them behind them in gangs. So it brought out maybe some of those difficult issues that the GMP are having to deal with. But the whole premise was wrong in my view, because we are doing the opposite. We are throwing everything at trying to help people who've got nowhere else to go. And we would never criminalise people just because they don't have a home.
We're getting anywhere with spice.
Let's ask Wasim now so we can another.
I mean, thanks. I mean that is one of the key challenges in terms of vulnerable people that are out on the streets, in terms of how they're being exploited, and you know, we've gone through a huge amount of partnership activity in terms of the safeguarding element and signposting people to services in order to assist them. But the fact is that people are trying to make money off the vulnerable that are on the streets, and those are the individuals that we need to target. And we are having success. We're prosecuting a number of people, both in terms of street level dealing, but also tracing that back to the suppliers. And spices, such is the nature of this drug, in terms of it's being manufactured in people's homes. You know, we've done warrants and we've uncovered bathfuls of spice and the products and that manufacturing. So it is really, really challenging, and it's probably, in terms of drugs misuse and in terms of that supply in our communities, it's one of the key priorities for the police, particularly in the city centre as well. So huge amount of work being done. It's a growing problem, it's a growing issue. What I'm reassured about is that we're not just approaching this in isolation in terms of trying to enforce our way out of it. You know, there's a whole approach here in terms of the health aspect, the educational aspect, as well as the enforcement aspect as well.
I think the problem just to build on what Wasim saying, the whole strategy we're developing here is we're giving Greater Manchester Police or outreach workers somewhere to offer to people. Bed Every Night gives them options that they wouldn't have had in the past, so they can say to people, look, we can get you in somewhere tonight. And then that allows you then to perhaps be tougher with those that you need to be tough with, rather than what the programme suggests, that we're just having a sort of a crackdown on everybody. Well, that isn't, I can absolutely assure everybody in this room, that is not the case.
Is everyone convinced by what the Mayor's saying here, that the homelessness problem feels like it's moving in the right direction in Manchester, that the policies are working? That lady at the back shot her arm up. No, behind you. Don't worry. Yeah, we'll definitely come to you. Don't
Hi,
worry.
it's Debbie Morgan.
We will.
Everything you've said so far has been about a solution, and I think it's fantastic that we are leading the country in terms of addressing homelessness. Everything you're doing is fantastic. We've not mentioned the cause. The cause is universal credit. The cause is the military who have been thrown out with no support. So, you know, whilst we can be exemplary and be proud of being exemplary, central government will look and say, you know, universal credit, well, that's fine because Manchester have coped with homelessness in this way. So, in my view, there's so much more we need to do to bring to life the causes of why we've got this phenomenal, exponential presence of homelessness in the city.
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I do point that out. I mean, particularly universal credit. I mentioned private landlords as well before, you know, as one of the main causes. But you're absolutely right. And the wider issue is austerity, isn't it? So basically what that has done is it's torn quite big holes in the safety net that used to be there. The truth is, any of us can stumble these days, can't we? Life is very precarious for everybody, isn't it? And the thing is now, if you fall, you can carry on falling, go right through and end up in the doorways. It's scarily easy, I would say, for people to do that, particularly those who've got extra challenges in their life. So young people leaving care, as you say, people leaving the forces. It's still the case that we get people discharged from Strangeways straight on to the streets of central Manchester. I do a walkabout every so often. I'm doing it again next week. So I do go about the city centre and I talk to people. And these agencies are adding to the government is adding to the problem. And they aren't giving me enough. They're giving me some help, to be fair, but they're not giving me enough help to deal with the problem that they're creating. So I absolutely agree with you. And you know, I think we need to point that out as well as doing the right thing ourselves.
Now, I think I'm going to be in trouble if I don't get to this woman's sing. She's been waiting a while, and she's wearing a Vivienne Westwood brooch, so she's not mucking around. Right, yes, go ahead.
I just wondered if you could say something about housing first, because we've talked about a bed for the night, but I think it's more than just what happens short term for people, it's longer term. and I think that's an important initiative too.
Yeah, thank you, because that is, I think it's helpful for me to be able to say to you that the strategy is more than just temporary shelters, which would sound a bit like a sticking plaster, wouldn't it, and not a permanent solution. So we have got some government funding to be one of the first areas to run what's called Housing First. So this is effectively supported housing, or a tenancy, a secure tenancy with wraparound support built in, so mental health, addiction, or other types of support. And that is now open. It's just open up for referrals in Greater Manchester. So that is part of our system. We've got the first stage, which is Bed Every Night, and now they've got more places to refer people onto through Housing First. So I want you all to understand that this is, we are building a complex sort of system here where people can make a journey away from the streets and hopefully then sustain a life beyond the streets. And I will carry on doing it. It's my top personal priority. I will carry on with it, Chris. I do donate part of my salary to the Mayor's Fund because I'm not asking anybody to do anything that I am not personally prepared to put my hand in my pocket and support myself. I just am amazed at the way people continue to come together and demand action on it.
You're the Juan Mata of politics.
He only donates 1%, I think. Although his 1% is more than my 15, I think.
Talking of percentages and stuff, do you want to give us marks out of 10 for homelessness? How you think you're doing?
I'm going to give a slightly better one now. I'm going to give 8 because all I can say to you is I know I've worked flat out on it.
Okay.
We've built a movement, and that wasn't easy. We've got everyone starting to pull in the same direction. The figures are starting to show that we're getting things going in the right direction. And yeah, Bed Every Night is unique in the UK, and we should be celebrating it, not pointing out problems with electrics, which, by the way, I did not fit myself, those electrics in
I'm glad you mentioned housing, because that takes us nicely on to the issue of the broader issue of housing and the green belt and all of these issues that we've got to wrestle with at the moment. Another contentious thing to talk about. We've got a question from Neil Ball. It's the aforementioned Neil. Here we go.
Good evening.
Evening, Neil.
Evening, Neil.
What are the plans to get the government to allow the GMCA to use the 2016 ONS figures before GMS 3 comes out, so the Greenbelt doesn't need to be included into the GMSF?
Well, we have pressed really hard on that very point, and I'm afraid the government is guilty of what's the phrase? Double speak, or you can more directly call it that, because we had the minister standing up in a debate. You saw it, saying, "Oh, it's up to Greater Manchester. They can do what they want." I'm afraid that is completely and utterly wrong. The government have recently intervened on a council who used the 2016 figures and taken over their plan. I think I'm right in saying Wirral Council have been intervened upon by his department. And so, for me to hear him in that chamber, his civil servants are saying exactly the opposite to us. And you know what they've done? This has kind of been gone into the public domain today, so I'll talk about it. We had agreed a housing deal with the government to bring some of the brownfield sites into play so that we could build more there. And when we went for our more reduced target from what they wanted as part of that housing deal, they've now cancelled the whole thing. So effectively, they're blackmailing us to go for they say you'll only get the housing deal if you go for 227,000 homes. And that is way higher than anything. And they're saying, and if you don't do that, there's no money for brownfield. And so I've got a figure, it's at 201,000, I think we've got at the moment. And I'm not going to change that, but I want you to understand they are actually putting massive pressure on the other way to make us put the number up, not reduce it. And it's just so frustrating to be in my position when he just rolls up in the debate and just throws out as though it's all up to us. And here we are getting these sort of the complete opposite from civil servants.
Yeah, I know Brexit takes him far too much government's time. Is there no way actually literally calling him out?
Well, he was the famous man of the Malthouse Compromise, and he doesn't seem to have done very well with that either, as far as I can see. So, but again, it's a classic. Well, clearly, his attention's been on that. He rolls up to a debate, clearly hasn't read his notes, just gives out a few off-the-cuff comments which were wrong, and then obviously you've got people now campaigning in the local election saying, "Oh, the minister said Greater Manchester can do it. It's all Andy Burnham's fault." This is where Westminster, for me, I'm so glad to be out of it, because the way it behaves is just fundamentally wrong. It's dishonest. And so the truth of the matter is they are trying to make me go much higher than what I've currently got in the latest draft of the spatial framework. And actually the latest position is they've withdrawn the housing deal because we won't go up to the inflated figure that they want. And that is factual. I'm just giving you the straight position that we're in.
Is there any bit of you that regrets kind of going down this path reform-wise? Because you've got protests from the likes of Bury Folk Keep It Green campaign. I know you lot say Bury. It's fine, I'm not going that far. And you've got some of your own Labour councillors, MPs in support of the old Greater Manchester spatial framework as well. And I just wonder if sometimes you just think, do you know what, it would have been easier to have not gone down this road.
No, it's a really important point. I mean, I know it's not going to be everyone's favourite document, but a planning framework of this kind allows you to move the numbers around to where you can actually sort of work as a collective, and by doing that, make the burden of housing sort of fall in a more manageable way. So I think I'm right in saying, Alex can correct me if I'm wrong, but Stockport, Trafford, Bury, and...
You said it.
Have I got them right? Trafford have got lower housing numbers through the spatial framework than they would have had if they'd done it as an individual council, because Salford and Manchester are building more. They want more than their target, and because of that they've taken pressure off those other boroughs. So if there was no spatial framework, you would have more in the borough. Am I right, Alex? I don't want to get this wrong. Than if you'd done it. If you'd done it alone, you'd have more than you would have through the spatial framework. Pardon?
I've got the figures for Stockport if you want.
Yeah. So, I mean, Alex has got the figures, and actually, we've done a big job in the borough here, and Alex did, of moving the development, the burden of development to the Stockport town centre, and that has eased pressure on the Greenbelt.
So in terms of the government methodology, the figures that you're questioning, that requires Stockport to build 20,000 homes over the next 20 years. As a result of the spatial framework, we've been able to reduce that by 5,000 homes by redistributing those 5,000 homes to other boroughs that want to make up more housing need in those boroughs. So without the spatial framework, we would need to find land for a further 5,000 houses. And if you compare the first iteration of the spatial framework to the current version, we've reduced the Greenbelt take from 12,000 houses 2 years ago to 3,700 now. So it's a huge reduction. And that's been a combination of shifting units to other boroughs in Greater Manchester and doing much more in terms of identifying brownfield sites and other areas in urban areas. A key example of that is Town Centre West, where we're in the planning stage of setting up a mayoral development corporation, 3,000 houses around the areas of the viaduct in the town centre. But it's not enough to identify brownfield land. You have to demonstrate that that brownfield land is deliverable. And that's why Andy's point is really interesting about the government reducing some of the promises they've given us in terms of housing support, because that's about delivering more in brownfield sites. Let me just say, by the same token, it is important that we build more houses in Stockport. We do not build enough houses in Stockport for our population. I'm sick and tired of the number of young people who come up to me and say that they grew up in Stockport, they want to stay in Stockport, and they can't stay in Stockport because we're not building enough houses, and many of the houses that we are building are too expensive. The fact is that the market wants to build in Stockport. So the issue is, how do we exert control over the market to make them build where we want them to build and not where they want to build, which is always greenfield sites? and exerting control over the type of housing, so we build more affordable and more social housing here in Stockport, not in ghettos, but across the whole borough, so that we have mixed communities. So I understand the controversies that we have with the GMSF and the current iteration of it. I absolutely get that. I get people's concerns. But we have to see the bigger picture and also the constraints that we face. So this is about how we minimise green belt take as much as possible in Stockport, given those figures. But unless those figures change, there is no way that we will have a plan that the government will sign off for Stockport if we avoid building on the green belt. So the issue is, how do we minimise it as much as possible here in Stockport?
Thank you, Alex. I'll tell you what, I appreciate you got a question, but we've only got 5 minutes left. All right, very quick point. Yeah, very quick point for that, gentleman.
That's fantastic. You've got such a passion for it. But we're Littleborough, Smithy Rochdale. We don't have a council or a council lead with your kind of proactiveness and passion. So what do we do about our particular area? What you've just delivered then steamrolls over anything that we've discussed, sat in, with planning, with council lead. What you've just said in 2 minutes there is massive more than what we've ever sit in our Rochdale
for you, mate.
Yeah. I don't live in Stockport.
No, I'm joking.
We are consulting, and I want to assure you it's a real consultation. And so I've got to work, it's obviously the plans come up to me from the councils, so it's kind of their plans. But I have to, I do challenge and push back, and I do my best to, but get them into a shape where I can support them as well. And I promise you, I will be looking at the responses from Rochdale, and we'll see what people are saying about the plans. We then have got another process where we've got another consultation on it later this year. So there's a long way to go yet, and I don't want you to feel that it's all a done deal, and it's not. We do need to build these houses. We need to find a place for them, but we're still in a genuine consultation with you all about how we get this thing right.
It's not a done deal, but honestly, I've heard more sense come out of your mouth just now than what I have out of the entire Rochdale Council. So.
Well done, Alex. Right, we've only got a few minutes left, so let's take a trip to Brexit land. Where is Miko? Miko, I pronounce your surname for
Miko.
me. Miko,
Yeah.
beg your pardon.
Good evening.
Good evening, Miko.
It's a big issue, so my question is in two parts. I hope you can bear with me, okay? Some refer now to the referendum of 2016 as the will of the people. If we accept that the will of the people would impoverish the folk of Manchester in the case of a no deal, or even Theresa May's deal, what preparations specific to Manchester agencies are being made in case of these scenarios? And the second part of my question is, given that the will of the people was to some extent encouraged by anti-immigration rhetoric, is social community cohesion in Greater Manchester, which is a richly diverse community, threatened by Brexit?
So on your first question, there's a huge amount of planning. I remember Alex saying once that we've had to, some ways, put some council funding, given everything else we've got going on, they're having to use council funding to plan for no deal contingency. It's very, very serious, and something that none of us, I don't think, no one in Greater Manchester wants no deal as far as I can see, beyond some opposition politicians. We've got to stop it at all costs, in my view. So my position is I still am waiting and hoping that a kind of doable scenario emerges out of this process tonight that will allow us to move forward. But I'm really clear that if we get to the kind of jaws of no deal, if you like, then I would support a second referendum at that point. I don't support one before that, but I would if that's where we finally get to in this process, that we get to the point where we're about to crash out. I think we've got to stop it at all costs, because you're right, it would do major damage to the Greater Manchester economy. But I've been told, supply of medicines would be under threat. Greater Manchester Police still tell me that they don't know what the security arrangements would be for flights coming in from Europe in terms of sharing information in real time. The implications of this are massive. And I think
what about the specific preparations, though?
Well, they are being done. I mean, there's contingency planning that's going on within the police. The airport have done the contingency planning because there is an arrangement now that means planes could take off. Medicines is a real issue. The NHS in Greater Manchester is already reporting some pressure on certain medicines.
And I guess we'll see how much all of that's cost one day, will we?
I hope so, Chris, because I think it's scandalous, to be honest, that the hardliners in the Tory party who are driving a no deal have forced everybody to spend all of this money on a scenario that most people in this country, I don't believe, want.
And specifically in Greater Manchester, the cost of the contingencies that you're talking about.
Yeah, there's been a real cost. I can't remember the figure you gave, Alex, but there's been councils have had to devote resource to planning for this when actually...
Do you know how much we've spent in Stockport?
We don't know how much Brexit's going to cost us as a council, and if you think about that, it's, you know, if the economy crashes and our borrowing costs go up, that has to be funded. We have lots of EU citizens who live here. We need to support them. We don't know the wider impacts on public services if people start leaving. So it's not been scientific, but we have had to find for the next year £500,000. Is that enough? I don't know. Is it too much? I don't know. We don't know. We have to take what we think is a prudent approach to Brexit. And of course, that's £500,000 that we would otherwise spend on day-to-day council services. The government has provided some funding to all councils to help prepare for Brexit, but it's not enough. And we need to make sure that we're as prepared as we possibly can be in Stockport. But what the future holds, I don't know. But as a council, we're determined to make sure that we mitigate the impacts on our residents as much as we can. What that mitigation looks like, I can't tell you at this stage.
And just finally, because there was the secondary question that Miko put about social cohesion, community cohesion under threat if there were to be a no-deal Brexit.
I have to be, you know, we do have to be careful what we say about this, but I have had advice from Greater Manchester that they think there would be a rise in hate crime were we to be in one of the scenarios here. It could potentially be in a second referendum scenario. It's why I'm wary of it, if I'm honest with you. I think it would be quite divisive. But I think you could, in a no-deal scenario too, I think that would be a very divisive and dangerous position to find ourselves in with regard to social cohesion. I still take the view that the public interest or the common interest of Greater Manchester lands now in doing coming to an arrangement which I would call a soft Brexit. That's what I think is in our best interests, that has a working customs arrangement of some kind, or is even the Norway option. That I think is in our best interests, because I do, no deal would do economic damage. A second referendum would do social damage, in my view, and neither of them are particularly palatable.
Norway Plus still paying contributions into the EU, freedom of movement. If it was the Norway Plus option, you're still in support of that, are you?
Well, that or a customs arrangement. We send 60% of our exports to the EU. So the Greater Manchester economy is more dependent on Europe than the rest of England.
But it still come with freedom of movement.
Yeah, but there are some, you can have some breaks applied, I think I'm right in saying, under the Norway option. And to be honest with you,
they said
we
that
wouldn't be in this
before.
position if the UK government, over many years, including the government that I was in, to be honest, had applied freedom of movement properly. We've never applied it properly. If we'd applied it properly, the rules that underpin it, we wouldn't have had this concern, because actually the public would have accepted that as a pretty fair system, but we never did. And that is a really frustrating thing.
Sorry, Miko, I think to the woman behind you, because you've had a couple of little questions there and she's had her hand up for a while. Sorry, yeah.
Me or you? Yeah, no. Two things. I mean, firstly, with regard to the last point, and why don't politicians say that? Why could that not be part of the solution? That actually, hey, look, staying within as members of the EU, we can actually resolve these issues purely by implementing the regulations that were there for us to implement.
Well, it's trust, isn't it?
Yeah. But my main point, though, was we've heard today that Theresa May is saying that she will resign if the withdrawal agreement gets over the line. The CM2 deal that you've just alluded to relies on the withdrawal agreement going through. The Norway Plus element of it is then part of a non-binding political declaration. Is it really, really reasonable? Can we trust, with Theresa May then stepping down, with a Tory government who are likely to put in an ERG-type leader, that political declaration with the intention of a CM2 would hold? I think that it is too risky given the political environment that we're in and given the powers that seem to be controlling the Tory party. And it really concerns me, Andy, that the combined authorities are not perhaps speaking to this risk and protecting us, the people of Greater Manchester, from it.
I think I understand the point, Kath. I think it's a risk that is only kind of just emerging now properly, isn't it, as Theresa May has made this statement. So it's a kind of new risk. But I think you're right, it is a real risk. And when I look at the so-called runners and riders, I'm not much liking any of what I see. I don't know who we would say would be a good option. So there's so many unknowns here, aren't there, in terms of the period that we're going into now. And I think we have to keep measured in what we say. We have to keep it factual, because we've not had enough of that, have we, through this process. I do favour what you might call one of the softer Brexit options. Maybe we differ a little in that I still feel people voted. If we didn't sort of recognise that and follow through, that we would have a really divided country, I think, for a long time to come. But if we get to a situation where the Prime Minister or the leader of the Tory party won't honour that situation, and then we are careering towards a hard Brexit or a no deal particularly, then, as I say to you, I would be then standing alongside you calling for a second referendum. So, I just think we're entering the period now where this will be decided. And it's my job at all times I've got to try and speak for everybody. I've got to try and see, the problem with Theresa May, I think, Chris, is she's been a Prime Minister for the 52% and not at all for the 48%. And I've got some regard for her, but that's where she's gone wrong, and she's focused on the Tory party, not the wider national interest. And I see it in my job as to be a mayor for everybody who voted in all different ways. And I do have to try and minimise the economic damage, minimise the social damage of what comes from this. And that's what I'm trying to do here.
Now, I know we could talk about Brexit forever, but I think we're going to probably have to knock it on the head. But I know that our guests there have got a banner they wanted to roll out here.
A message for the people
of
Manchester for Andy.
Okie dokie.
As Andy will be aware, we quite a lot of people.
Just give it. What's your background? Your kind of interest in this?
I'm part of Manchester for Europe.
Okay.
So a lot of us we took 9 coaches down to London
on
a march for a people's vote.
Yeah. The one last weekend. Yeah.
Lots of people couldn't go, so we had a piece of blue paper in St Anne's Square for 2 hours, and we just asked people to sign it. In solidarity to the people marching.
Okay.
And I'd just like Andy to see this, because these are the quiet people. These aren't people like me that get noisy, and I know politicians hear a lot of noise from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
These are the people that are just desperately worried about the future of this country, what Brexit will do to them, their lives, to the society we live in, and it's a plea to Andy to represent these people, the ones that are just so desperately worried about their future, the behaviour of the government that we have, are looking for Andy.
You going to sign it?
I think the march was
Bob,
Saturday.
are you going to sign it?
He's obviously I have to get permission from Bob before I make any statements. I do have to represent, because I said I have to represent people who feel like this. But I live in an area in the Wigan Borough where people don't necessarily go into St Anne's Square very much. And they come out of a pub last week and said to me, when are we leaving? Why aren't we leaving? Why are people ignoring us? And so there are other people who have different sentiments to the ones that are on this, the ones that are on this thing. And the point is about this, you've got to somehow find something that brings those people who signed that and those people back together, don't you? You have to somehow find something that does that. And I think a soft Brexit option right now is probably the best thing that would bring those two groups and preserve trust in the democratic system. And that's my judgment. I know you've got a different judgment, Kath, but that is my judgment. But if that can't be done, and there isn't a soft Brexit option, and we are at no deal, then I'll be on that thing with you. I'll be signing it, because I don't want a no deal, and I will campaign with everything I've got against a no deal situation, and that would mean a second referendum.
I know there's some... jolly good. I know there's some more questions, but we're gonna wrap it there. But sorry about that. But thank you. Listen, it's been great, and thank you for all of your contributions. I didn't know what kind of crowd we would have. I didn't know how vocal you would be, but it's been fantastic. So thank you all very, very much indeed. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Can I, on behalf of everybody here, just say a thank you to you, Chris, for you gave us a good laugh. We had a laugh along the way. I better say thank you to Bob for...
Campaign for mayor starts here.
But can I just say, because it is relevant to the last point, I'll make this point very quickly, Chris, before everyone goes.
Sure.
But I think what has happened in this room tonight is a better way of doing politics that we kind of need a bit more of in this country. That system down there has not served us well. It's actually left us in this mess, to be honest with you. And I hope you get a feeling that you may not agree with everything I've said tonight, you may not agree with everything I'm doing, but at least we're debating issues tonight that affect us all in a better way. And the thing about devolution is it's about place first, not party, isn't it? It's about saying to everybody, look, let's unify around this place and see what we can do to make it better. So I would just say to you, if anything that comes out of this whole situation, we should get even louder in our demands for more devolution in Greater Manchester, because I think that will allow us to build a healthier way of doing politics here.
Okay. And final point, remember to leave the back exit rather than all that boring stuff. Good, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. Yeah, good stuff. Cheers. Thank you.